So if you guys don't know me, I am Jessica Kelly, and I'm on the teaching team here at Spout Springs Church. Right now we're doing a series called Future Focus, and the whole purpose of this series is to talk about your future. Whether you know what it looks like or you're still wondering where it's going, we're talking about the things that help you strengthen yourself and arm yourself for all of the challenges that are going to be in front of you. So today we're going to talk about one of those challenges, which happens to be anxiety. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. Apparently, we all have had it. So to start things off, we're actually going to take a look at a poem together. This poem was written by a teenage girl. Today was the absolute worst day ever. And don't try to convince me that there's something good in every day. Because when you take a closer look, this world is a pretty evil place. Even if some goodness does shine through once in a while, satisfaction and happiness don't last. And it's not true that it's all in the mind and heart, because true happiness can be obtained only if one's surroundings are good. It's not true that good exists. I'm sure you can agree that the reality creates my attitude. It's all beyond my control. And you'll never in a million years hear me say, today was a good day. Whew, teenage girl. Evil in this world. Nothing good exists. It's all beyond my control. Did any of you guys get a phone call this week from your kids' school? I know that there were some parents that were affected by this. You might be online, you might be out here. Somebody threatened to shoot up one of our schools. And the parents got a phone call in the afternoon, and it said, don't worry, classes are still going to happen tomorrow. So we don't really know what's going to happen, but we still have to send our kids to school tomorrow. It's going to be fine. I'm sure that didn't cause anyone any kind of anxiety whatsoever. No, not at all. When you watch the news, what do you hear? Civil wars, mass shootings, genocide. The measles are making a comeback. That's great. Food is being tainted everywhere we look. It's enough to just drive your anxiety right through the roof, isn't it? So what about you guys? Go ahead, feel free to tell me. Shout out some honest answers. What causes your anxiety? Wait, bills? Did I hear some bills? I think that's true. How about paying for the bills? How about finding where to find the money to pay for those bills? What else you got? Work. Children? Do they cause anxiety? What about parents? Do we cause anxiety? Maybe just a little bit, yeah? How about deployments? Nobody deals with that. How about moving? Especially right when you feel comfortable, you found some friends, you got a good church, and then you got to move again. How about death? Anxiety lurks in so many different corners, doesn't it? I can't do what I want to do today. I want to be able to stand here and tell you, I have the secret to a life that is free from anxiety. In fact, if I could say that and write a book about it, I'd probably be a millionaire, but I'd also be a liar. Because here's the real secret. Anxiety is inevitable. 100% guaranteed, guys. If you can think, you have yourself a lifetime supply of anxiety, par for the course. This isn't something that is just coming from me, though. Let's go ahead and take a look at what Jesus says about it. When he was warning the disciples about his upcoming death and resurrection, he made a promise to them, but he also warned them about something. Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you." Here's the warning. I do not give to you as the world gives. Jesus does not give as the world gives, because this world cannot, this world will not, this world does not give you peace. It's a really sad truth. And it's also why we have so many people that are resorting to things like suicide, drug addiction, running away from home. Anxiety exists. You will face it. And sometimes death or escaping through an unhealthy way seems like a better choice. Before we get any further today, I want to make something clear. If you are somebody who is experiencing anxiety and it is so crippling or it is so destructive that you know you cannot cope on your own, get help. Seek professional guidance. Learn whatever you learn today that God puts on your heart, yes, but know that He has also put people in this world that have a calling, that have a passion, and that have the training to be able to help people overcome whatever it is you're going through. Don't be afraid to reach out. Now let's talk about normal anxiety. Just if we could have a nice little breakdown of the numbers of what we experience, I found this, and this is just rather interesting. Turns out that 40% of what we have anxiety over involves things that will never happen. 40%. So if they're never going to happen, why are we worrying? What about 30% involves the past? Can you change the past? I know I can't. 12% involves the mean things people say about you. 12% of our anxiety is based on mean things people say. And it's probably not even true. Some of it's maybe true. 10% involves anxiety about your health. And here's a sad truth too. The more you worry about your health, the worse it's probably going to get. Stress is not good for you. And then there's this tiny little 8%. 8% of what we have anxiety over involves actual problems that we will actually face. So when you think about it, pretty much all of our anxiety is stuff we can't control, stuff we can't change, or it's not even a reality. And all of our anxiety, every last bit of it, is not made better if we sit in fear of the unknown and do nothing. Life is awful, really, really hard sometimes. And I know that some of you have experienced things that are nightmares that no one should have to face. How you ended up where you are right now, it might not be totally your doing, but you only have one person to blame if you stay here. We can do better. God designed us to do better. And we owe it to God. We owe it to our family and our friends and our coworkers. And we owe it to ourselves to do better. God warned us that this world is not going to give us peace. When you read anything in the Bible, that message is obvious. You got people being thrown in lions' dens, furnaces, swallowed by whales, killed for their faith. But there's something else in Scripture that's crucial for us to recognize if we want to figure out how to move forward. God shows us how to use anxiety for our benefit. God shows us how to use our anxiety for our benefit. Anxiety, in itself, it's just an emotion. It's born here and it's born here, right? It sends our bodies and our minds through this whole roller coaster of feelings and experiences. And some of what we go through when we deal with anxiety, it's actually good for us if we learn to approach it properly. So, let's do it. Let's dig in and learn from my favorite teacher. We're going to spend pretty much the rest of the morning with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this was shortly before he was betrayed by Judas and handed over to the Romans for crucifixion. Right off the bat, God lays it out for us. When anxiety strikes, have a battle plan. A battle plan. When anxiety strikes, have a battle plan. I have a battle plan. Do you guys want to know what it is? You want to show them my battle plan? This is a win. That right there, that's my battle plan. Okay, maybe not. Maybe we should go with something a little more specific than Jesus take the wheel. And now you're all singing the Carrie Underwood song in your head. It's okay, we can have a moment, enjoy it. So, battle plan. Let's figure out what one maybe should look like. How about you go ahead and open up your Bible if you brought one, or you can use your Bible app on your phone, or you can scan the QR code that's in the bulletin. We're going to be looking in the book of Mark, chapter 14, starting at verse 32. So just to give you some background for this Garden of Gethsemane that they're in. This was a very familiar place for Jesus and the disciples. They spent a lot of time there. And when I say a lot, I mean the last week leading up to the crucifixion, Jesus was spending every day in the temple and every evening at the Mount of Olives, where the garden was located. It was just on the eastern side of Jerusalem. So this place was somewhere he went to very often, and it was a place that was so familiar and so comfortable for him that Judas knew he could find Jesus in the garden when he came with the officers to arrest him. On the night in which Jesus was betrayed, shortly after they had all enjoyed what would be called the Last Supper, they went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Jesus had a battle plan. When anxiety strikes, go somewhere comfortable, go somewhere where you feel connected, where you feel safe, a place where you can be honest with the anxiety and face it. And what was the central part of this battle plan? Sit here while I go and pray. Pray. Let's take a look at the prayer Jesus prayed in the garden. Jesus went on a little farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." This prayer, this moment, it is so complex when it works to teach us about the humanity and the divinity of Jesus Christ. But that's another sermon. So, what matters for us today and for our purposes is that the moment that you feel anxiety creeping in, do as Jesus showed us. Go to God immediately and honestly. As Paul, the writer of a lot of the books in the New Testament, he told this to his early church members. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Prayer itself will not remove your cause of anxiety. I repeat, prayer itself will not remove your cause of anxiety. And if somebody's ever told you you just need to pray harder, that's not fair. We are not promised here, anything that God has given us. We have never been promised to be rescued from danger, saved from disease, or given a winning lottery ticket. We are promised something, though. It's the same thing that Jesus promised the disciples: peace. The peace of God. Not the peace of worldly contentment, but something bigger, something greater, something more powerful and beautiful than anything this world could ever provide. There's a small hitch, though. In order to embrace the peace that transcends understanding, you must be willing to accept reasons that escape your understanding. God has a design for you, just you. You have a story, and it is yours alone, and He knows it. You might not understand why He has you on this path, why He has you facing this particular trial, or why you have to go through the fears that you are facing. But it's not your place to understand God's why. It is your place to try a little prayer. Open yourself up to the peace that He provides and use that to strengthen you in your battles. And then the next part of our battle plan is to trust the process. Let's go back to Jesus in the garden. This next little detail is from the book of Luke. "And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Okay, I know I just pulled you guys out of Mark, and you're like, why'd she go to Luke? Luke was a doctor. So Luke cares about doctor things. So he's going to tell us some doctor stuff that Mark isn't really going to worry about. This could have just been an expression. Great drops of blood falling down to the ground. I could see that, but there's actually a medical condition that likely took place here. It's a really fun word to say. Hematidrosis. Anyone? Hematidrosis. It rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? It's beautiful. So when your anxiety and stress is so intense and so severe, the capillaries just beneath your skin can actually burst. And when they do, as you're sweating or crying, those fluids mix with the blood released from your capillaries, and you are leaking what looks like blood. Yeah. Imagine the stress that Jesus was feeling in that moment. Hematidrosis, not so far-fetched, huh? And if you want to, don't do it now. Wait until after the service. Google it. I'm serious. It is crazy how much more it happens than you would expect. So how does this relate to trusting the process? What's the connection? God has designed our bodies a certain way, and they go through certain things, don't they? If we experience anxiety or anger or frustration or pain, sweating, crying, those things that your body wants to do, those are actually healthy ways to be able to manage the stress and the anxiety. I have a confession. I sweat, like buckets of sweat. It's really bad. Like when I'm super anxious or super nervous, it's gross. It's disgusting. But now I get to take it as badges of honor because apparently it's really good for my body to release these toxins. Or for those of you who think crying is for the weak, actually, studies show that if you hold it in and you don't let yourself have that good sob session, you actually make your bodies weaker. It can lead to high blood pressure, metabolic disorders, like when you get a really upset stomach because you're afraid to cry in front of others. It can even lead to heart disease. And at the very least, if you don't let yourself feel what you are going through, that's when you start to turn to other things that aren't healthy. Drinking too much, drugs, all the things you don't want your parents to know you've done. Trust the process. If your anxiety is driving you to sweating drops of blood or crying, ugly cry, it's okay. Trust the process. There's also a spiritual process that we learn about here. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. What did Jesus say in His prayer? He sought out God's will, right? Hopefully you're not going to be anxious enough to experience hematidrosis. Sounds like a mess. But no matter how minor or how advanced your anxiety is, you need to trust the spiritual process that God has designed. Trust in Him and not in your fears. Only when you trust in Him can you have the clarity to see the path forward. When a man of good will is troubled or tempted or afflicted with evil thoughts, then he can better understand how great a need he has of faith in God. When things get tough, that's when you know you need Him, right? When Jesus was tempted in the desert, He turned to God. When Jesus was troubled in the garden, He turned to God. When Jesus was dying on the cross, He turned to God. That takes us to the final part of the battle plan. Action. Identify what you can control and do it. Just do it. Remember, pretty much everything that causes your anxiety is outside of your control, but that doesn't mean you're helpless. There are things that are within your control, and those are the things that you can focus on. Let's go back to the garden. Then Jesus returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Did you see what Jesus calls Peter? He calls him Simon. I thought his name was Peter. Why is Jesus calling him Simon? So this is pretty fun. When Peter was born, his parents named him Simon, and he was Simon for many years. And then Jesus met him, and Jesus said, I'm calling you Peter. Isn't that cool to be given a name by Jesus? I'm sure that Peter loved when people called him Peter. It was a reminder to him of all that he can rise to become, of all of the great expectations before him. And then Jesus just called him Simon when he fell asleep. That's a pretty good burn. Now, the other thing that's going on here, I'm sure the disciples were tired. It's probably a pretty good guess to make. Luke describes the disciples as being exhausted with sorrow. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been so emotional about something, so overridden with anxiety that it is hard to even stand up and stay awake? They had a big day. I mean, the disciples, they had to go to Home Depot, pick up some flooring and some wallpaper, got to go to Bed Bath & Beyond. No, it wasn't that kind of day. It was a huge day. Jesus told Peter and John to go get the sacrificial lamb because it was Passover, and they had to find a house and prepare it for their dinner. And then, what a dinner. Jesus is telling them all kinds of things throughout the whole meal, and they can't even imagine how to prepare for them. He told them one of the disciples would betray him. He told them he would soon be sacrificing his actual body for them. He prayed that they would remember him when they gathered together in the future without him. They were probably afraid. They were exhausted with sorrow. And they really didn't understand what was about to happen. And even if they could understand it, they could not control it. Jesus himself said that the Son of Man was going just as it was written of him. Well, what could they control? What Jesus said. They could be alert. They could keep watch and pray. And Peter, James, and John fell asleep. They should have been able to control whether they remained conscious, and they failed epically. But our God, he's a God of grace. These boys are going to get another chance. Let's see what happens in the garden this time. Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. And they didn't know what to say. You had one job. You had one job. Didn't Jesus the Christ, the promised Messiah, the Son of God, just say, watch and pray? In your story, guess what, guys? We're all Peter, James, and John. You will fail. In your story, you will fail. But feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. Jesus said that to none other than Simon Peter. Peter, the one who fell asleep. You know what else Peter does? Shortly after Jesus is arrested, Peter is the one who denies him 3 times. Acts like he doesn't even know who Jesus is. Failure. There was also this time where there was supposed to be some walking on water involved, and Peter looked to Jesus and was doing fine until he looked away. Peter is all about anxiety. It happens a lot for him. And Peter is all about failing. It happens to him. Because he's a lot like us, right? And yet, this Peter who failed, Jesus told him, feed my sheep. See, Jesus knew Peter's heart, and Jesus knew Peter's path. Feed my sheep. When it mattered most, Peter didn't fall asleep. He fed God's sheep. He lived his life and he died his death in the name of Christ. He spent every moment he could, sharing the gospel with others. And he's still feeding God's sheep today. Every time that we read the New Testament, Peter's feeding us. Do what you can, whenever you can, with all the tools God provides. And if you fail, do what you can, when you can, with all the tools that God provides. The more effort that you put into doing what can be done, the less time that you have to even dwell on the things that are outside of your control. Focus on what you can do, and it helps to move aside the things you can't. So what did Jesus do? We know he prayed, but what kind of action did he take after that? When Jesus returned to them the third time, he said, "Go ahead and sleep, have your rest." But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. He saw Judas, the disciple who would betray him, rushing into the garden with troops and Jewish leaders, torches and weapons. Jesus didn't run. Jesus didn't hide. He prepared himself. As we learn from the book of John, Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him. So he stepped forward to meet them. "Who are you looking for?" he asked. "Jesus the Nazarene," they replied. "I am he," he said. By declaring this in front of the Jewish leaders, Jesus set into motion his arrest and his crucifixion. "I am he," he said, "Jesus of Nazareth, the promised Messiah, the great I am, God, the one they feared so much that they killed." Jesus knew this was under his control, and he acted. And he saved us, every single one of us. We have these blue bags here. You see them in the front and in the back. He saved you. And if this is something that you're feeling for the first time, that's what this is for. At the end of the service, you can go ahead and grab one of these bags, and someone from our church will sit with you and talk for about 10 minutes about what it means to be a follower of Christ and to accept this gift of peace that he is giving you. If you've already done this and accepted Christ, the next thing is baptism. Pastor Jose talked about how we had a beautiful baptism at first service. We also do them every first Wednesday in the evening. We have a potluck. We do a huge party. It's great. Everybody brings food. Some of it's awesome. Some of it gets left because it's not. But the baptisms are wonderful, and it's a great way to just celebrate this new step in your walk with Christ, with friends and family. We also have our Step 1 class tonight, and that's going to be over at the Steel Fortress, and it's a chance for Pastor Steve, our lead pastor, to introduce you to this church and tell you about what Spout Spring stands for, and what its path is, and where you can fit in to be able to help yourself and help this church advance God's kingdom. If something came up today and you want to go ahead and maybe work on that battle plan and pray, that's what the cross is there for. If you want to take some time and just be honest and immediately direct with God, you can go right there and do it. If you need somebody with you when you pray, we have some folks around the outside of the gym that are happy to pray with you, pray over you, pray for you, whatever you need. Just go on up to them. If you want to take communion, we've got a communion station right in the back, and we moved the front one over to the side there. And if you just want to reflect on the sacrifice that Christ made shortly after the garden, you can go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and look back at that poem from our teenage girl. This time, we're reading it backwards. Today was a good day, and you'll never in a million years hear me say it's all beyond my control. My attitude creates the reality. I'm sure you can agree that it's not true that good exists only if one's surroundings are good. True happiness can be obtained because it's all in the mind and heart. And so it's not true that satisfaction and happiness don't last. Some goodness does shine through once in a while, even if this world is a pretty evil place. Because when you take a closer look, there's something good in every day. And don't try to convince me that today was the absolute worst day ever. Same exact words, different perspective. That's all it takes. How about some other words we looked at today? Let's go back to the words from Jesus. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give. This world, it can be an evil place, but no evil is greater than the power we can harness when we embrace the peace that comes only from Jesus Christ.